All right. Hello, everyone. I think we're slowly trickling in. Well, thank you guys for joining. This is our next session, Power Systems Maintenance Beyond the OS with Phil Rowbottom. So Phil is a Unix consultant here at Service Express. If you guys have any questions throughout the session, feel free to put them in the Q&A tab on the right. If we don't get to your question at the end of the session, we will bring it to our list for the live Q&A at the end of the day tomorrow. For any other comments, please use the chat function on the right. The recording for this session and all sessions will be available right on the website immediately following the session. So if you want to rewatch it or catch any other ones that you missed. And if you're looking for the handouts and the decks from any session, we'll be sending out a survey at the end of the event. And once you fill that out, you'll get access to all of the slides. And with that, I will hand it off to Phil.
Thank you, Brooke, and welcome everyone to my talk today on Power Systems Maintenance Beyond the OS. A lot of I've noticed recently in the last, say, 12 months or so is some different power environments where there's been a lot of focus on the maintenance of the operating system that's running the business applications, that being, say, IBMi, AIX, or Linux. And it's kept up to date, it's patched, etc. But there's not so much focus on the other components of the power system. So I'm just going to move along. Yep. So things like the hardware management console, the code for that and the firmware, the virtual I/O servers, the power systems frame firmware, the I/O adapter firmware, and disk and NVMe drives. Now, I only got to 20 minutes here, so we're not going to go into depth. I'm just going to go over the top of things. I've got a few screenshots of processes of how easy this can be. If everything's HMC managed, if you haven't got a HMC in your environment, you've just got a single standalone, the process for doing this is different and probably a little bit more disruptive than what it will be if you have a HMC. And I think one of the reasons this tends to happen at our operating system running our business applications gets a lot of attention is from the security point of view. The security teams are running scanners against it. They want to know that all your security fixes are applied, etc. So, and that can miss some of the other components that we have within a power system. Anyway, so moving on, just some examples of things that I've seen around where there hasn't been the maintenance done on the other components. VIO servers, this actually came from a talk I attended at Tech Exchange on cloud migration, where one of the identified risks from the on-premise system was that the VIO servers hadn't been rebooted in 5 years, and they weren't sure that they could. Shows you how reliable these things are, but it shows you also that there was a lack of maintenance in those 5 years. So you should probably patch them once a year at least. But there's 3 to 4 service packs per year come out for VIO server. So depending on your willingness and your requirements to keep things up to date, there you could do it more than once a year. But once a year is always a good start. Similar things, frame firmware. Sometimes you'll see an environment with multiple frames of the same model, and they'll have different firmware levels, and they may have been purchased at different times and came out of the factory with different firmware, and that's what they've still got, a few years later. Again, lack of maintenance. That's what it shows. We also have another thing with VIO servers where we've got dual VIO server. They might be on different VIO levels, and well, to start with, it's an unsupported configuration, which you can run like that during the upgrade process. But you don't want to be running like that all the time. You want to have both VIOs running your same level. And also, where you've got dual HMC, it's important to keep them at the same level and patches. Again, if they're the same version of HMC, well, you want to keep them close together. But one thing you don't want is to have say, for example, a V9 and a V10 HMC attached to managing the same frame, this can cause you issues potentially, as they do sometimes change the metadata on the service processes between HMC releases. So if you've got two different releases trying to manage the same frame, it can get into a little bit of bother. I haven't seen that occur myself, but it's something that apparently can happen, and you're best to avoid being in that situation where it can. And another thing, if you happen to have an environment where you're using PowerVC, I know our Service Express hosting environment here in the UK, we manage that using PowerVC. So we, of course, have to update and maintain PowerVC itself. And we're also using Novalink. So that's another component to update and patch, etc., and keep up to date. And of course, bring in functionality and security enhancements for PowerVC managed environments if you happen to be using that. And check the compatibility matrix between PowerVC and the HMC levels. The latest PowerVC 231, it doesn't support version 9 HMC. It supports version 10 and above. And if you want to run PowerVC, if you want to run version 11 HMC, you need to be on PowerVC 231. Prior to that, it wasn't officially supported. It may work, but if something happens, because I know that PowerVC with a V9 HMC on a non-supported level, it will work, but if you have problems, well, you have problems. It's not really an advisable situation to be in. So we've got things to update. So if we take a bit of a look at, say, HMCs. So maintaining our HMCs, we've got some different aspects here. We've got upgrades of HMC. So if we're looking to go from version 9 to, say, version 10, or even V10R2 to V10R3, we've got to run through the HMC upgrade process. It's a little more involved, a couple of extra steps versus the update process. So the update process, we're just applying the latest PTFs or patches to the HMC. When we do an upgrade, we've got to take a backup of the upgrade data for the HMC. You can back up that to a network, FTP server, NFS, a USB, and also locally on the HMC itself. And you upgrade from the media network upgrade images to upgrade the HMC. And a recent discovery of mine is that HMC V10R3, maybe earlier versions too, but this is where I noticed it, can download the upgrades direct from the IBM website. Another thing to note, if you've got V9 HMC or even V8 HMC 8.7, it's been a long time since either of those HMC levels have received any patches or upgrades. So you may have outstanding security issues on your HMCs if you're not running version 10, which your security people may not be happy about if they happen to scan your HMCs. So anyway, just a few quick screenshots now of the process of doing HMC updates with the HMC downloading those updates direct from IBM. So we go to the HMC management page on the HMC UI. We go to update HMC. Then we can tell it the location we want to get the updates from is the IBM website. This, of course, all depends on your HMC having access back to IBM, which is a good thing to have. If you've got the cloud connector for Cloud Management Console, you have to have access back out to Cloud Management Console, and also for dial home, any faults that the HMC may dial home. So it's good for the HMC to be able to connect out and back to IBM for different reasons, including downloading the latest updates, which also includes the firmware. So we go through the update process. It gives us a screenshot here of the available updates, and we select the latest one that we wish to apply. The HMC update process will sort out any prerequisites there, and you continue on. It will download them, it will apply them, and then after the reboot, your HMC will be updated to the latest level. And if anyone does ask, these screenshots are from a couple of different HMCs. I found I had one down level, so I was able to actually run the process on and capture a screenshot on a CR1. I haven't gone through the upgrade process. The system HMC that I have in the lab, being a CR1, is not compatible with version 11 HMC. But interestingly, when you look at trying to download or telling it to download the upgrades from IBM, it will give you the option on the CR1 HMC. So if anyone's got a CR1 HMC and does happen to go through the upgrade HMC process and sees the option like we have here from the IBM website to upgrade to HMC version 11, don't do it. That HMC level requires a CR2. This is probably a little bit of a bug on the IBM side. But this shows how sort of simple it is to apply these updates if you've got a HMC and potentially the upgrades as well. That has the access back to IBM to download them. You don't have to go over to Fix Central, find the updates and obtain them, then have them staged somewhere that the HMC can access them. It can just get them direct from IBM for you. Makes your life a lot easier. So, yep, this is just the next screen here where it's giving the summary of what this HMC would do if I was to allow it to upgrade to version 11, which it's not compatible hardware. So in this particular HMC that the screenshots are from. The other thing that, well, I've been guilty of this myself. No, that's a good point. Very good point. Thank you, Andrew. So anyone who's got CR1 HMCs is going to need to buy some new hardware or go to VHMC. So another thing in the past, I've been guilty of this myself, is the firmware of the HMCs themselves. It's one I've never really known to be maintained on the x86 myself. Any organization I've worked for, we've just left it. We haven't done anything. But if we're on the newer HMCs, the power-based ones, and especially the CR2s, this is rather easy. And there's a link here to the IBM page. Ooh, how far back did I go? To where IBM have a much more detailed outline of the process for this. So this is just looking at from HMC. This one, the firmware for the actual HMC itself, we do have to go to IBM and download the latest firmware levels. And then when we log into the BMC for the HMC on its web interface, and this is from a CR2, we can see the detail of which firmware, etc. it's running. Now the CR2 HMCs that I have access to, that I took the screenshots from, they're all up to date. So I couldn't actually take any further screenshots of the upgrade happening, but that's actually, you can find on the link that's here to the IBM blog on the process. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong link. That's the Fix Central link. Sorry, I've got it somewhere else. But anyway, we can see here when we're on the BMC for the HMC, but we've got some different levels of firmware available. So we've got the functional one and we've got the active one. So the active is the one that's in play, 940 HMC. I know functional is the one that's, but sorry, the functional is the one that it's currently booted up and using. That's the firmware that's in play. So if we wanted to, we could actually delete this active firmware because it's the older version. And similar here with the server image, there's the BMC firmware and there's the server firmware, and we can delete the old one. You can have more than two here, but just keep it tidy and just keep the current one and the previous one, and that's probably enough. And to update the firmware, if you go further down this page on the BMC, you can see you've got the option to upload the firmware file from your laptop to the BMC. You can also use a TFTP server. I've not done that myself because you have to set up a TFTP server to do it from. But it's fairly straightforward. You upload the new firmware, then you reboot the HMC onto the new firmware. So moving on, we've also got the power system firmware itself. So we've got a couple of categories here. Again, we've got updates and we've got upgrades. So updates are within the same firmware release. They're generally non-disruptive if you have a HMC. If you don't have a HMC and you're doing this update through the operating system running on your machine, if you've got a small machine that's not virtualized, you probably don't have it attached to a HMC. These updates can sometimes be disruptive. It is possible, depending on what the update changes. It's been a while since I've noted one that's been disruptive. There were a few in the Power 8 days. I haven't came across a Power 9 or Power 10 update that is disruptive. They tend to contain your bug fixes and feature enhancements, and when you apply them, it applies it to the temporary EEPROM, which allows you to back out from the permanent EEPROM. And obviously, yes, call IBM because they don't like you backing these things out, and it's disruptive. And before you apply the new firmware to the system in an update, you can commit the temporary to the permanent. So you've just got the two levels, and you apply the update, and you can go backwards to that. I've never had to back one out myself. I'm sure there are people who have in the world, especially those who test these things a lot. And when you do a non-disruptive update, some of those updates get deferred until the next power cycle of the machine. So, but that's sort of fairly normal. Most stuff applies concurrently. We also have upgrades. So upgrades, they're going to a new firmware release. So going from 1030 to 1060 firmware on a Power 10. These are always disruptive. So you'll have to have a frame restart or power cycle. They tend to introduce the more major changes to the firmware. Couple of things that I can think of, and one that's very old is in the Power 7 days, when we went from the initial Power 710 to the 720 firmware. They made very large changes to how the shared CPU are scheduled onto the physical CPU within the hypervisor. So it was very big, and it gave you about a 20% performance boost. So it was a very big change, but it was something that required a disruptive upgrade to the firmware. And of course, each power generation does come with its own new firmware release. Generally, your Power 10s are 10XX. I haven't included Power 11 here, which is, they all start with 11. And when you do an upgrade, the permanent and the temporary sides are both updated. And if you're going to back out, you would require assistance from IBM. Again, myself, I've never, ever had to back one of these out. So hopefully I never do. It's everything seems to be a reliable process, reliable updates. So both your updates and your upgrades, you can download them from Fix Central or directly from IBM through the HMC. So just going as an example here of a power system firmware upgrade process or update process, we select the update the system firmware, we accept the agreement, and it tells us here all the current levels, etc. Now these machines are up to date. We can see there is some unactivated deferred level on these ones, but they're at the 1070 firmware 1030.70 level, which is the last level of the 1030 series for Power 10, which is now out of support. So we do, at some point in time, need to do a disruptive upgrade on these machines to the 1060 series. And well, that just shows the other side of the rest of the screenshot. It's a bit too wide to fit on one slide. So we can choose our source location. We can pick IBM. It will then go, you can search for updates or upgrades. It will then give you a list of what's available. In this case, for update, it's listing all the updates here as disruptive because there are no updates. We're already on that 90 final level. So if we try to apply it again, it would be disruptive. So you don't normally see that when there is actually an update to occur. And you can go through the same process for upgrades as well. It will show you which upgrades are available for the machine from the IBM website. It makes it a lot simpler than having to, or just more easy and convenient than having to go to Fix Central and download and then upload. The other thing we need to do to maintain is VIO servers. So this, I've just got a couple of slides because this is a topic in its own right. They're a very important foundation of the system when you're running virtualized workloads, and you should maintain them for reliability and performance. So you have releases and fix packs, and there can also be iFixes for VIOS when needed. And one thing to certainly do is when you're upgrading your VIOS, check that the hardware is supported by the VIO release level. And yeah, topic in its own right. So just here, we've got a quick slide on the life cycle of VIOS, the current levels, what's out there, what's still supported. Basically, 4.11 and 4.12 are the still being maintained and upgraded dated versions of VIOS. I have seen a roadmap that there will be a 4.2 or something along those lines coming out next year, but that's still a while away. This particular screenshot is from the website listed here. I took it on the 30th of April. So these older levels, 3.x, there's no further updates or anything for those. They're now not being maintained by IBM anymore. So the next thing to look at along with our VIOS is IO card firmware. So one thing tends to get caught out a bit. When IBM release a new level of IO card firmware, there's sort of a 6-month grace period between when the new release comes out and when the old one is no longer supported. So for Ethernet card firmware, that can be handled two ways. So if you're using SRIOV on your machine, the Ethernet card firmware becomes part of the frame firmware, of the system firmware. So that makes another reason to keep your system or frame firmware up to date. It has effects on your Ethernet card firmware. And of course, we've got fiber channel cards. This is fairly critical when you're operating in a SAN environment. You will have a house with an unstable foundation if you've got buggy fiber channel card firmware. I haven't seen one for years, but there used to quite commonly be published matrices for combinations of software and firmware that you support within a SAN environment for your fiber channel cards, your switches, your storage arrays, but I haven't seen anything like that for a while myself. Usually just keep everything on the latest firmware levels and you'll be all good. Now, the I/O card firmware in the latest HMC levels in V10, I think even back in version 9, you can use the HMC to download and update the firmware from the IBM website. Again, making things just more convenient. So we agree to the agreements here, and we choose our source location. There's a drop down. There's other options, not just the IBM website. If you have to have it locally within your environment and can't connect to IBM, it will then give you a list of all your devices in the system. So all the fiber channel. In this case, there's no Ethernet card listed because this particular machine that I took the screenshot from has its Ethernet cards in SROV mode, so they are part of the frame firmware, and it lists here all your current firmware and the available. So again, this machine's all up to date, which is good. But if we had another machine where there were updates available, it would have the actions that you can be taken against each particular device for the firmware and whether they're disruptive or not. So this also will cover NVMe devices that are in the machine as well. So which brings me to my next one. Same thing with disk device and NVMe firmware. Same thing, 6 months after a new firmware release, the old one goes out of support by IBM. So that's that. So having had only 20 minutes, and I've probably run a little longer than I should have, that's the end of my quick presentation. And I have a few useful resources here. So Fix Central, the Power System firmware update, CR2 firmware update that I mentioned before. It gives a lot more detail on how to actually update the firmware on the CR2 HMC, the O lifecycle, and some articles here from Jackie Lynch on updating HMC and VIOs and upgrading VIO and AIX, and HMC upgrades. So that's everything. Let's see, what do we got? Firmware, hardware questions here. Kiana. Is it, Kiana, your questions here? These particular questions, I think, Kiana, I'd need someone from the sales side to answer those questions. But generally, for IBM systems to be able to get the latest firmware, you need some agreements with IBM to access that. But I can't answer those questions. They're more in the sales side of things. I think, are there any other questions here, or that's everything? In the chat. And thanks to Andrew, who's posted up a couple of links and mentioned about the V10 R3 going end of service in September 30th this year, and for his link that he's put there on the firmware level. Anyway, hopefully that was useful. It was probably quick and not that detailed because of the time limitations.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you all for coming. After this, we do have some networking rooms. So if you're looking to meet some new people, talk about all the things, we've got kind of 3 different categories that you can join. So general admin, hardware, and security. So a pop-up will come up soon and you guys can join that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.